because of the woman's chromosomes are X chromosomes. But we get a variety in the stories of divine birth, where males are also born. So this is suggesting a superhuman type of process indeed. And I don't tend to get hung up on the scientific idea of whether parthenogenesis is possible, because we are in the realm of shamanism. We are in the realm of female spiritual practice, in the realm of cities, where many types of things are possible according to certain belief systems. Also, I find that it's important to stress that the practice and this work was not and is not about suggesting that we would do away with sexual intercourse, that men are not needed. Not at all. This is about a specialized practice that involved women in going through a fairly rigorous process that could not be easily done. And therefore it would not be a method by which we would replace human reproduction. A bit about the methodology. I approached the texts, again, histories, cultic practices, myths, and legend, from a few different perspectives. One was a feminist hermeneutical perspective, reading between the lines type thing. One was looking very intuitively, really opening my third eye while doing this research. It began with an intuitive flash while I was studying the material on Demeter and Persephone, and I read a Sicilian scholar, Anna Maria Corradini, who suggested that the story of Demeter and Persephone is one originally of mother-daughter self-replication. Prior to the advent of the Greek male gods into their story, the intrusion, if you will, they were producing parthenogenetically on the ontologically divine level. And that sparked me. I just remember the day I was standing in my brother's apartment and I said, oh my gosh, were women actually doing this? From there, with that as a potential hypothesis, and I knew that I was going to do my dissertation on something about Greek priestesses, I then started looking at the material. It was amazing, the tremendous amounts of data that I started just getting flooded with. And then began an iterative process where I would have a hypothesis, find evidence for it. That information would then spur other hypotheses. I find evidence for that, and it was this kind of iterative process. A lot of times I would just get downloads directly about a certain idea. And I'd say, oh, wow, how am I going to prove that? And then there would be the series of synchronicities, an accidental thing that I found while looking on Perseus online, just remarkable, remarkable events that would happen that just kept leading me forward. And it really felt like a sacred work, and I feel that I can say that in this type of an audience. But a primary method that I also used was neo-euhemerism, which is controversial. There are many classic scholars in the past who use this method. What it basically is it's based on Euhemerus, who was an individual of the 4th century BCE, who wrote about the deities as divinized ancestors, divinized because they had brought some great benefit to humanity. I don't dismiss the deities to that degree, but what I say is, gee, these mythological stories are actually histories indeed. And the Greeks understood mythos to be history as well. It's we modern Westerns who have a hard time understanding that the Greeks thought these were talking about events on the astral realm that had happened. Legends were considered true and historical, and myth was considered historical on a different plane that would sometimes intersect with the human realm. So looking from the idea that myth provides clues to history, that's how I proceeded. And I cross-referenced together where I could historical fact, anthropological information from writers like Herodotus and so forth, and I take a lot of it at face value. That's another controversial point, But this is what I've done, just to sort of explain a little bit. So what have I found? The main findings. That there were categories and epochs of these divine birth priestesses, starting with a matriarchal ethos and epoch of humanity. By matriarchal, I mean in the sense that scholars today in matriarchal studies are looking at it, where the primary deity tends to be female. There is a connection with nature in the religious and cultural life of people, respect, subsistence level. Women are at the center and in reciprocal gender relations with men. And economically, a lot of the control of food and goods is given or is in the hands of women. And there's a lot of gifting in the economy. That's how the commerce takes place. Completely different social structure. So I'm not talking about the stereotypical idea of matriarchy where men are being bashed over the head or some sort of fantasy paradise. I'm talking about something that is being anthropologically affirmed today through the remnants of contemporary cultures that are matriarchal. So that under this matriarchal period in the pre-Bronze Age, and I don't know quite how far back this would go, that the first stage is what I call the pure parthenogenetic priestesshoods. High holy priestesses whose aim was to do what? Be the earthly representations of their goddesses. And this was another layer I had to decode, which was that the goddesses were originally understood to be parthenogenetic themselves, virgin mother goddesses. They were not consorted. They were not sisters, wives, and daughters. In the earliest substrata, and that's what I emphasize in my second book, they were female creatrix beings. And this is what I contend the West was originally dealing with, particularly in Greece. Under this schema, the point would have been to miraculously conceive the avatar of the goddess, the next priestess in line who would serve as the earthly representative. Because these beings who would come in would have a kind of a superhuman knowledge, if you will, and would be able to serve as guides and evolutionary influences for humanity. This was a female lineage situation originally. And these are some of the goddesses that I find evidence were originally conceived of as virgin mothers. Gaia, Hera, Artemis, Athena. The cosmogonical template that I find for this in the Greek tradition is that of Demeter and Persephone, I believe. Their story is a remnant of this mother-daughter virgin goddess replication that was also interrupted by male predatory behavior on the ontological level when Zeus Hades came to rape these entities. And I believe that we can see possibly this idea of virgin birth going way back into the Neolithic and Paleolithic in these many so-called double goddess images that are found all over the world, which are females side by side or two females coming out of the same torso, which I contend could be a representation of parthenogenetic reality in a sacred context. Then I find a secondary stage of these pure parthenogenetic priestesshoods, the sun-bearing priestesshoods. There seems to be a somewhat of a switch now from female avatar production to male avatar production. Still, this is in a parthenogenetic method, though. The women are not having any kind of interaction with male entities of any sort. And one vestige of this that we see is in the Mary story, particularly when we get these triptychs that indicate an ancient conception of the male being emerging from the female, the mother of God being the whole from which the male emerges. And so, as Eric Neumann says, this represents the mystery of the male being a part of the female, emerging from the female. The miracle of the male's containment within the female, he says. The Holy One under this schema was rendered a king. Usually it was male. And his death, as Pindar says, was a requital for ancient wrong. So here we have the idea of the karmic cleansing of the people through this sacrificial murder. That would have been the ultimate purpose of that sacrificial murder, of this great high holy being agreeing to undergo this. And again, I believe we see this in the stories of Dionysus and Asclepius and Heracles and others. The cosmogonical template here is Hera, who gave birth parthenogenetically in the midst to several different beings. In some stories, Hephaestus, the smith god. In some stories, Ares. And in some stories, Typhon, who was none other than the winged creature who challenged Zeus to supremacy of the universe. Talk about an important ontological story of what has gone on the astral plane. This entity lost, and Zeus claimed ascendancy. And we'll see more about how that reality evolved through these priestesshoods. Hera did that, mind you, right as she found out that Zeus had stolen parthenogenetic power. How, though? The male gods can never give birth by themselves. They always have to swallow or rape another female entity in order to give birth to their own double. And that's what I emphasize in my second Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity, and it's what I find is the basis for the Eleusinian mysteries, actually. So that's a whole different interpretation that I give to those rites. Where we see an ancient belief, and this was an example of being affirmed synchronistically when I would come up with an outlandish idea and then try to find ancient text for it. This popped up toward the end. This says that it's from the Revelation of Adam, a Gnostic Nag Hammadi text. And it says, "From the 9 muses, one separated. She came to a high mountain and spent some time seated there, so that she desired her own body in order to become androgynous. She fulfilled her desire and became pregnant from her desire. He, the illuminator, was born." What this is showing us is that we're in the realm of the female oracular tradition, first of all. The 9 muses. Priestesshood. One separated. She went off. She went to a high mountain and spent some time seated there. What's happening? She's going into a deep altered state of consciousness, a deep meditative state. So that she desired her own body. There was a tantric element to what she was doing that involved sexual energy and erotic desire. So this was not a matter of virgin birth in the sense of birth cut off from erotic feeling. On the contrary, it was a redirection, and that's what I continue to find in these women. It was a redirection of the sexuality inward to spark the meiosis, to become androgynous. And she fulfilled her desire and became pregnant. This is at least showing us that was a belief circulating in the ancient world that this could happen. And in fact, Plutarch affirms that the ancient Egyptians believed that it was possible for a woman to conceive through, and this is something I'll get to later, through connection with an entity and breed a new generation. So that brings us to this stage. I find an abrupt break in the stories. Now what I find is evidence for what I call the Hieros Gamos priestesshoods. Priestesshoods of sacred marriage. That sacred marriage being between the actual human priestess and a male god who is operating on the astral realm in a non-human form in the first phase of this. This is where I categorize all of the stories about unusual conceptions and rapes of the maidens and the nymphs that we have in the Greek story. I believe they are clearly talking about an intrusion into cultic practice. The stories of divine births in this way went all the way through the Roman period. We have stories of historical figures such as Plato, Pythagoras, and Alexander, who have serious legends about being conceived in this way. And this is a painting of Alexander's mother, Olympias. The story about her is that she conceived Alexander when having sex with Zeus in the form of a serpent. a snake.